Director in the area. And it's my pleasure to call to order the August 15th, 2024 Funding Round Working Group meeting, Board Funding Round Working Group meeting. So thank you to those of you who are in attendance today. And with that, would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right. Hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sorry, Paul. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Baumgarten.
Here.
Branscombe, absent. Desmond, absent. Guerrero. Joyner. And Chair Thomas.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And it is hard to believe that this is now the last meeting of the Board Funding Round Working Group. So just really have extreme gratitude for all of you and our staff that have helped lead such a productive process as we articulated in our board meeting. Public communications, it's this time as any person wishing to address the working group on any item not on the agenda may do so at this time.
There's no public comment at this time.
All right, I think we're all here to talk about the same thing, and that's on our agenda. Excellent. And disclosures, directors will disclose any item they have a conflict of interest under state law. Any conflicts of interest today we need to be aware of? Not seeing anyone. Okay, excellent. We now move on to the consent calendar, which is approval of the minutes of May 8th, 2024. Any comments or changes? No?
Second.
Move to approve. It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment on the minutes? All right.
There's no public comment.
Excellent. All right, all those in favor of approval? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Excellent. We now move into the information, which I'm excited to hear more about, the farm to market and agritourism information on this. And that's very intriguing, and I know the board adopted this today, so tell us more.
Yeah, well, so when we took this item to the Transportation Committee in June, as Chris mentioned, we received some comments from the public about incorporating specifically into the System Preservation Program, which is that roadway sort of focused one for maintenance, being able to incorporate concepts that allowed, we listed out the different types of not types of roads, but attributes of roadways that we were interested in directing funding towards. And it came up that farm to market was something, particularly in our rural regions, that wasn't explicitly put in that list. When we had originally put together the list, we thought, oh, well, truck routes, but that's not as simple in some of our rural areas. And then it also came up related to agritourism, which we think about obviously Apple Hill. We've got the wine country in Placer County and elsewhere, also in El Dorado, actually. And so is there a way that we can incorporate that? Because while some of that is seasonal with the tourism aspect, the farm piece is huge for economic development in our region and is a real concern. So we have been kind of thinking about the idea. I've talked a lot with Woody about some concepts. We brought it to the staff working group as a big topic to discuss at our last, 2 weeks ago. Had a very good conversation about it. And I think the universal recognition is that there's no need to do something that makes it so every single rural road is considered, some sort of farm to market route. That really, this truly is about maintaining the critical roads for the infrastructure for supporting agricultural businesses in our region. So we wanted to just start the conversation here. We want to incorporate this into the final guidelines that come in October. A little background of where this came from is SACOG, and we brought this up, I think, at the TC, or it was mentioned at TC. There was the crop report, and the crop report specifically kind of talked about the need for the region to have, designated farm to market routes. Initially, it's like, oh, well, we should take the next step and actually implement crop and do a study to, figure out what those roads are. We don't really have the time, frankly, or the resources to do that. And I think there's a more streamlined way that we can incorporate those concepts into our guidelines and our framework. So we started kind of noodling on some ideas with a staff working group 2 weeks ago. And what really came out of it was that maybe we should look at minimum daily traffic for routes for trucks in some of these really heavy agricultural areas to help identify which are the ones that are most used, which would potentially have the most wear and tear, or what are the routes that serve general agricultural areas that then feed into processing facilities or production facilities that serve multiple farms. And also kind of the concept of thinking like, how can this be a year-round thing? That's going to be the issue with the tourism piece, is that a lot of that is very seasonal in nature, at least for like Apple Hill, which is the one that comes up. So that's going to be a whole nother can of worms. But trying to figure out what sort of parameters around like what is defined as a farm to market route. So thinking about things like truck volumes, having to show some qualitative and quantitative data in the application for justification of why this route should be considered a farm to market, because there aren't necessarily designated routes in our regions that like, here's a map of all the farm to market routes. We can't just point to something. So thinking about economic development tools, that came up in the conversation with staff from Yuba and Sutter counties actually were the most vocal about this specific piece, not surprisingly, of, you know, are there data and metrics that can be used to be able to illustrate the economic development and the positive economic impacts of the roadways. Like, this is how much goods are coming on these roads because we're taking this to this facility. So all this to say, we don't have the answer today. We wanted to kind of talk it through with you all and just sort of get some ideas. We weren't sure if there was going to be conversation at the board during the item on this. So we were kind of feeling it out of, are we going to get some concepts there and bring it here? Obviously that didn't happen. So just kind of sharing where our heads are going on this and what might feel right to you as kind of like the board working group and the leaders of this effort on our last meeting before we finish this off. Does that feel right? Looking at, it's the only one where we're actually going to be asking for truck data or traffic data. We're not asking for that with the other ones, but I don't know how else to be able to quantify and identify a truck route that's different than just, you know, maybe some major highways. What Yuba and Sutter said was all of our roads are considered rural. So we need to be able to funnel that to the ones that matter the most, and truck volumes from the agricultural areas seem to be the way to go. So we have to do a lot of kind of data and research. This is why we're saying we'll bring it back in October with the final guidelines. We need to kind of come up with concepts, but I'd like to just open this up for conversation. And obviously I think Kevin Busey is here, and he's had some conversations with some of the Sacramento County folks about what their thoughts are on it. He may have some additional information to add from his conversations, but we do think it's important enough to add in, and would love to just hear if any of you with your different perspectives and region, if that seems like the right way to go, or if you've heard from your staff.
Okay, excellent. And I'd like just to have, you know, kind of an informal discussion on this, and let's dig into this, and as well as from all of you that are here with us today. So
I'd be happy to start, I guess.
please start us
Being
off,
from-
Mark.
From Sutter County anyway. Just a little background. Thanks. I was the president of a company that sold John Deere equipment out of 6 or 7 local counties around here. So ranging from Sacramento up to Butte to Yolo and everything else. So ag, I know a little bit about ag. And I think that the big question is going to be is what actually are the roads that are taking you from the field to the processing facility or to the shipping facility. And, you know, off the top of my head, I could list those roads that I know that are probably the main thoroughfares, if you will, or travel routes. But we don't do ag tourism as much as we probably have talked about that. We're not doing wineries or Apple Hill or any of that kind of stuff. But definitely it's huge, you know, it's a huge economic thing for us to get the crop out of the field to wherever it's going to be processed and or shipped away. So for me, a lot of state highways, 113. I don't know if you want, do you want these?
It's all helpful for us to understand where we should be going.
So the state highways, 113, 20, 99, 65, 70 are all used out of our area, 5 in the 505 as well. I hope I'm not missing anything there, but you know, that I think it would be great to get some metrics on actually what's happening. And it's sometimes crop dependent upon what's actually in the field. So like for this year, walnuts and nut crops aren't really heavy. just because of geopolitical stuff, but, rice and some of the other crops. And so I think that data is going to be different at different times and in different years as well, just because of what the farmers are actually putting in the field and growing and then shipping.
So I have a question on on the slide presentation this morning under our system preservation program, you talk about a locally defined equity area. Perhaps would that same kind of metric apply that each area would define a locally defined ag area? Because like you say, we all know which roads are our ag connectors. That perhaps there could be something, and I'm not sure how this locally defined equity area works, but allowing for localities to be instrumental in defining those areas would seem important, given your comments too.
And that's kind of what I was getting at, was that I don't think we should be calling out specific roads because we are not the experts in that. I think that qualitative and the quantitative data in the justification section, that's what that's for, is what I'm thinking, that it's going to be up to the applicants to define, here's why we think this route is so important, and here's why we are asking for funding on this, and hey, it serves 12 farms up here that produce X number of, dollars worth of crops a year, and this is the route that they all take to get to this facility or to get to one of these other highways that, maybe aren't necessarily what we're looking at. That I think is what we don't have the time to be able to research and figure out what the routes are. That's what the crop study implementation would be.
Right.
So yeah, it's like a combination of zoning, economic activity, travel paths, truck volumes. Those are the things that we would be asking folks to tell us, why is this important to you?
Perfect.
I think the ag commissioners produce an annual report that talks about the economic,
Yeah.
And that's a place to understand the economic aspect
Right.
of what you're looking at.
Dr. Guerrero or Joyner?
You could easily do it, to go to the rice co-ops, that go to all the folks that are taking in these crops and say,
Mhm.
where's that coming from? How can we help you with that? So I think it's important to realize that ag is more than crops.
Mhm.
Yep.
I was a cattle rancher. I don't have one.
Oh, you don't have one?
I was a cattle rancher for over 20 years. My crop, if you will, was something very different. Depending upon the season, I'd have to move them to different pastures that what was available at that particular time in that given year. So it wouldn't be fixed. It wouldn't be something that I could pass on to you, other than the fact that when it comes time to go to market, there's very specific locations that you're going to be transported to, and it's going to be on those major highways ultimately.
Yeah.
So, but what level of information do you want? Because you're coming off of South Brewer Road with a rice crop going to Van Dyke's to deliver it. I don't think you want those little country roads that they're running down part of the year to be on this list, and yet.
Yeah. Well, and there is the question of eligibility in terms of just the STVG funding itself. It does
Right.
have to be on a certain level of roadway in order to even receive the funding. So you do weed out some of the like hyper local, super rural roads. So we are trying to focus on, major collectors, arterials, things like that. Now, obviously localities can define their roadways in many different ways. So there is that we need to look at, but, yeah, we have to be fair. We have to have some guardrails to make sure it's not being utilized in the way that we're not intending to utilize it. Now, truck routes, which is on that list, could be okay for some of the things that we're talking about in some of the areas, because there are clear truck routes that people can identify and say this is what, but I think it's when we start to get into some of the deeper areas of where it really is just farming, it's not a lot of, other uses, that's where it felt like maybe we were excluding some things, so.
And I have one more caveat to add to that, piggybacking on what you're saying, Christina, is that for El Dorado County, we're a completely different ag region, as you know, because we don't export our crops as much as we import customers, which is a very unique thing. And so our count is not truck counts. It's, all of you coming to see our bounty and buying the produce in at the family farms. While we do have some processing plants and some major, distributors, that's not the bulk of our ag area. So once again, I really appreciate the flexibility of looking at having this program farm to market and agritourism, so it can fit with each of our areas that are, we do ag differently.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Exactly, we are. You exactly are. We, that sounds so wrong.
That's your crop.
No, it's true though. It's true. So I appreciate the flexibility. I think you're right on the right track.
Yeah, I do think that the agritourism one is a little bit more tricky because of the seasonality associated with
But
it.
we have the volumes
You do,
though. We have
you
the
do.
volumes with the impact, and it's not a lot of roads. It's just a few that are
Yep.
heavily impacted.
That's right.
So I think with metrics, we can get there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And so I think we have to be flexible. It's not just trucks, it's cars. But if you are making the case for agritourism, not for maybe some of these other places, because that's where I think we lose sight of what the farm to market concept was. So agritourism, I think there's no other way to do it except for vehicular travel during seasonal. I mean, you have to show peaks, right? There's peaks and valleys with seasonal tourism. Key destinations too.
Right,
Like you have
right.
to show it. I think in Placer, you got the wine trail, which is pretty clear where the wineries are, and there's got to be travel associated with that, vehicular travel that probably in the summer and fall,
Mhm.
a little bit higher than maybe it is other places, but at least to show that these are the routes that we're talking about. These are the roads most traveled that tend to have more wear and tear, I think, and an impact on our economy. I think that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, perfect.
In West Sacramento. we have
Yeah.
the port.
Right.
As far as shipping, I'd like to be able to take a look at how that aspect of it, as you described, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yes. And also, we're looking at expanding it. So whether it be importing it from a different region.
Director Guerrero, I'm sorry, can you use your microphone?
So whether it be importing it, or, bringing it in to, export it out. I don't know how that can be taken into consideration.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing. Well, we can look into that too. And I'm sure West Sacramento has a lot of information in terms of usage and done a lot of studies.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's open up to public comment. Kevin, I think you have some important information to share with us.
Oh, sure. Kevin Busey, Executive Director of Sacramento Transportation Authority. Yeah, I want to echo Director Joyner's comment specifically about the outreach and working with the growers. I think that's critical. And I think it'll help, from a qualitative standpoint, telling that story about where the need is a good thing. On the quantitative metrics side, I think it's going to be hard to get, truck volume information. Usually we collect volumes once a year. Are we at the right season for that? Right. So that's a little bit challenging. But if you have that data, great, supplement that with your application. That would be the approach I think that would make the most sense. There's the challenge, of course, with specifically on the farm to market routes. If you look at specifically Sutter, Yolo, Yuba, and somewhat Sacramento County, I mean, a lot of almost the entire county has agricultural, land use, right? And so you've got to limit it down. And I think what SACOG's trying to do is limit that down. It's less critical for the agritourism side because those are kind of defined areas already. But I think working specifically, one way to do that is working specifically with the growers, like Director Joyner said, we have the Sacramento Farm Bureau here. We can work with them and figure out kind of where those routes that are most critical. And then tie those probably to the distribution centers or processing plants and make a case for why this is the logical farm to market route. So that's more of a qualitative approach. So there's going to be a lot of discretion at the staff level to sort of go through that. But for this particular category, it seems to make the most sense. Thank you.
Thank you. I think piggybacking on that, also joining that with economic impact would be also an important factor. Not just any farm and any route. It's got to be some quantity of scale there and mass. Any other public comments and insights? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ron Vicari. I'm the Director of Transportation for Sacramento County. And I just want to commend SACOG staff for, this process has been a really robust outreach working with us. And I think this is an example where they really listened to what we were saying and what we were bringing forward. So I just really want to say thank you for that. I think there's some huge opportunities here to help our agriculture businesses. So just thank you. And we look forward to working with you guys to kind of shape this.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Any other comments? All right, thank you so much for being with us. All right, I'll bring this back to the working group. So this is just an information item. Are there any more insights or kind of direction for our staff as they embark on figuring this out?
So trust the farmers.
Mhm.
They know.
Mhm.
And if we do this right, they're not gonna be the ones sitting off to one side saying, why didn't they come to us?
Yep.
Because we could have told them.
Yeah.
So however that outreach is, start with the farm bureaus, go to the individual co-ops and such. All that information is there. The farmers themselves are gonna be reluctant to
Mhm.
talk to you.
Yeah.
So those associations will be the way to go, I think.
Great. And we'll continue to work with Woody too. He's been very much engaged and helpful just as the chair of the staff working group. And we'll continue to work with staff from those regions as well, from that have expressed a need and an interest at the county level, to just make sure that our path that we're going down kind of makes sense, so that when we come in October, we feel pretty confident and good about what we're presenting.
Right, that's wonderful. And any way that I can help, we link you up to the grocery, Woody can too, but happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I
So,
appreciate that.
all right, that's an exciting item. And so item number 3, the draft funding round criteria. Chris.
Thank you. We're launching the PowerPoint now, so bear with us for a second. All right, so you heard an item earlier at the board that was the overall framework for the funding round that we had carried forward. That was up to date at about June of this year. So what you're going to see today is really a building out of that framework as we move towards that final guidelines that'll be coming to you in October. Today, we're going to kind of discuss a little more in depth on these programs, these 4 programs. Talk through kind of the performance, how we're going to evaluate those through the application process, as that and how that gets put into effectively the guidelines as we go drafting those guidelines now for that final work product that'll come out of this 18-month engagement strategy. Just to kind of refresh your memory here, we have over the regional program, we have 2 primary kind of sources here. We've aligned our funding programs to their funding source. So on the federal side, two primary funding sources are our CMAQ funding and our STBG funding. And then so for the Next Generation Solutions and Clean Air program is CMAQ funded. System performance and system preservation programs are funded out of that STBG funding. Pressure that STBG funding is the one that has the requirement of major collectors and up. Although there are some rural set asides for collectors, I think smaller collectors, but we can get into those details later. And then on the state side, that 4-county, inter-county competitive state program. So the Next Generation Solutions and Clean Air program, as I described earlier, again, that funding of CMAQ funding has that requirement to justify an air quality benefit as part of your application. It's part of the cost effectiveness component of the application. We use 8 performance evaluation measures or outcomes as we generally score the project benefits of our projects moving forward. We have selected the ones that are appropriate for the funding program. I want to kind of step back and describe those a little bit before we go through all the programs, because what's important here is generally, historically, applicants have picked 2 of these to speak to promote and talk about how their project benefits these things. For example, reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions and increasing modal choice. For each of these measures, applicants will receive from SACOG a data set to help for their project. They'll draw their project on a web page, and it will spit out quantitative data to help them contextually understand the things around their project. So we provide a lot of data for every one of the applications that are submitted to us. And they have about 2 pages to kind of describe qualitatively how that project meets that. So we work a lot and have a lot of assistance as to speak to these performance measures and outcomes. So a little bit of a sidebar there. So we've been working with, and those who have participated in our funding programs before, especially the county can speak to, it's something we've ran, I think, for the last 3 rounds, this quantitative delivery of data for them. And then they can then speak to that data and helps them. So as we work with, especially our Placer County and El Dorado counties coming into this process, we're going to have a good amount of time to kind of work with and understand all the tools that are going to be at their disposal for this application processes going forward. So this program, it really focuses on these 5 evaluation metrics for the same project categories that we discussed earlier today. But it's really about kind of focusing on improving these components and these outcomes. And then I'm going to move in. This is the general format of our application here on the left. It's, you know, and I will say, as part of this program and part of this, we developed, and Director Jennings talked about this a little bit today as part of the REAP info item that he spoke about. We created an equity framework for our funding programs in general, and are going to be applying it to this. It's already being built into the guidelines. So the asterisk here indicates all the places that you can discuss basically how that project will engage the community and how it and the project benefits to that community, and then if it is in a disadvantaged community or not, or a geographic community. We've also created, as part of that, a way to self-define that locally defined equity area. And we give some guidance on how to do that, so that for those areas that we've heard, especially from a lot of our communities, that those smaller geographies don't rise up and really affect the census block or group, that you can define that if you have that need in that community and how you want to benefit that. So that framework has been created, and it's being integrated into our application and guideline process here. So, you know, these are kind of basic components of our application: the project background, location, talk about the community engagement for that project, how the community's input really drove the project or changed the project. And then the project outcomes. This is really where those performance outcomes that we talked about, the quantitative and qualitative components, come into discussion on the project benefits. We talk about project leverage, and by leverage we mean, are you meeting your match requirements? Are you over matching requirements? Are you more effectively using SACOG funding on that leverage? And how cost effective is your project? And then we're looking at basically project deliverability and risk assessment. We have used in the past a technical engineer working group that kind of looks at the project, says, is this engineering estimate appropriate? Is there risk on this project? Those kind of components. So these are the basic elements of the applications as they move through that we're going to be looking at here. System performance is, again, this is one of the STPG funded programs. This is the more flexible funding, and really here we're looking at safety, economic development, goods movements, again, increased modal choice, reducing congestion, state of good repair, and climate adaptation resilience. So a wider breadth of those performance outcomes to speak to. So they have some options there. This is going to be probably the most flexible portion of our funding moving forward. For the application and evaluation components, this is going to look very similar because it's almost identical to the other one, which is actually creating an opportunity. We're looking to see these 2 programs are kind of so similar in the structure of the application. We can probably just use the same application and make some efficiencies in that regard. So we're looking to any way we can improve and make the process more consistent and understandable for those who are new into the program and those who draft a lot of applications and have been doing this for a while. The big difference here is this program won't require that CMAQ calculation, but has a cost effectiveness data calculation that we have, and we have that information on how to do that in the guidelines. And then as we discussed, the system preservation program, really this is looking at that state of good repair solely. But we wanted to focus on these routes that really meet our regional needs, our transit routes, our truck routes, those locally defined equity areas, if they're already defined or if you're locally defined, that are really on these corridors that are really needing to, that are being heavily used, whether it's transit-oriented development or commercial corridors or new development areas that might need resurfacing. Again, active transportation facilities. We've been doing a fantastic job at this region of building out trails. There's a lot of new trails coming online. There is really very few mechanisms to maintain those trails and can be a challenge. So we want to be able to have this open for that facility, for those kind of facilities. And again, things that, operate as emergency response routes and things that are really critical networks that we need to keep maintained moving forward.
I do have a question to the listed evacuation emergency response routes. So how are you going to define that? How are you going to identify that, recognizing that evacuation routes are determined in an emergency? They're not determined ahead of time. So how does that work?
Well, for those who have listed evacuation plans, we could rely on those, but some, again, just like you said,
Our sheriff
are
says we don't,
absolutely ad hoc facilities. I mean, we have different evacuation needs for different parts of our region. Some are flood, some are fire.
Right.
So it's like those needs can be dependent on that.
And it
But
depends on an emergency on it as far as where we are.
Right.
You don't list evacuation routes ahead of time because you don't know where the fire is going to come from. So I guess my question is if a jurisdiction doesn't have listed evacuation emergency response routes, how can they be competitive in that area even though the need is there?
I've talked with Woody about this, and the language in the actual guidelines is a little softer than listed evacuation routes. What we're kind of getting at is that we understand that particularly in our rural counties, there are communities that are pretty isolated. But
True.
in order to get them out, there are really maybe one or two roads that you might be able to use.
True.
But the infrastructure is absolutely critical in being able to get. There might be bridge, there might be road issues, there might be many other things, and it could be addressing adaptation or climate issue. Flooding, it's prone to flooding, can't get out. There's all sorts of things. So I think it's really back to this concept of being able to locally define why. You have to make the case. You
Right.
can't just say, oh, no, we need this road. You have to be able to say why and why it's important and provide some sort of underlying data and information, but it's not us being prescriptive of
It's
like,
not a list you have to be on in order to
no,
qualify. Okay,
there
great.
are some counties that have clear listed roads that are for evacuation. And in that case, great, awesome, you have that. But we also recognize that not everybody has
Okay,
it.
perfect.
In Woody's new evacuation plan, he said there's a lot we can point to in
Actually,
that.
the study, yeah.
Yeah, the study, that
Right.
there's a lot you can point to in that and use that as data. And I said, absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just touch on one other thing with this program before we move on? So there was a comment today during the board meeting from SAC-RT about transit should be in this program. And it likely will come up at the board meeting in October. And so I think it's worth just spending a little bit of time talking about it and what our response to them has been and why. Historically speaking, when we had our previous programs, we had maintenance and modernization and transformative. All of the funding was lumped together and it was sort of like a free-for-all, right? You could apply for anything. It wasn't as prescriptive as we are doing now with the clear program paths. They did receive a lot of funding for projects for state of good repair. What we have done with this is we've split the STPG out into two programs, this one and system performance. They are still 100% going to be competitive and eligible under the system performance program. This is really specific to something that we have heard from all of you, all of the staff about we can't have transit if we don't have roads. It's a key component to being able to provide a lot of other modal opportunities for folks. And given the growing needs that we've seen, maintenance is about a third of the budget in the MTP and the blueprint coming up. It's a need that we have. And if we're going to encourage folks to maintain the roads they have now, we have to have something like this. It doesn't exclude them from CMAQ. It doesn't include them from the STIP, the 4-county STIP program. It doesn't include them from the System Performance Program. They're still eligible for funding under all of the sources that we have. It's just we've carved out a program. One thing to consider too, and I shared this with them as well, because there's two programs under STBG, the board, when we take the fund estimate, the board is going to have to make a policy decision of how much of the money goes to this and how much of the money goes to the other program. Given the size of applications that we are probably going to have, this program likely will have less funding just in general because of the types of projects that we're talking about than the System Performance Program, which might be more complex projects with a lot of different components and therefore higher dollar amounts. So when we start to talk about like catenary replacement for light rail and things like that, it doesn't really fit with what this program is intended to do. Now, that is a board policy decision that will be made next year. But my hunch is that it's not going to be a 50-50 split. We're going to have to provide you all with some insight of previous funding rounds and how much the asks were and how much went to this and how much went to that to give you something to work off of. So I've shared all that with them as the reasons why we have not recommended that transit be put into this program. And I just felt because it came up today, I wanted to be transparent about what we shared with them and that it's going to come up again in October. So.
Any comments from my colleagues? Personally, I agree with that 100%, because the preservation of our road networks is common ground for all of our jurisdictions. And just having dedicated funding that doesn't have to compete in an apples to orange category, I think is so important.
This application will look a little bit different. It'll be simpler because of those. It really is just looking at road maintenance and that level of data. So it's going to be a little simpler. It'll be its own application. But some of the same elements are there. Readiness and risk assessments are always kind of a part of it, but those projects are generally fairly straightforward and don't have a lot of risk to them. They're generally CEQA exempt if they're not doing it. You know, there are some reasons those are just easier projects to deliver. But in general, this is kind of the basic equity or the basic components. Did want to indicate this does still have an equity lens through it as it's looking at, you know, we kind of want to justify why are you picking this location? Why is this your priority for it? What is it meeting? And is it meeting these identified areas here? Is it, you know, so it's like we're leaving that to the jurisdiction to make that case. But really, this is going to be a simpler process, a general application.
I had a quick question.
Mhm.
At one point in one of these meetings, we talked about standardized assessments and there's kind of an industry standard, or there's one that's kind of used by a lot of people, but maybe not. Is that going to be incorporated into here somewhere? So everyone's on the same playing field, or how's that going to work?
We're going to talk about that in a second. There's we are looking at as part of one of our priority programs, doing a road maintenance like assessment. It's kind of a set aside so that we can go do you know, agencies basically, how they derive, it's called either PCI or PQI, is usually a truck will drive around with a bunch of sensors on it and it will determine what that is and normalize that. We are looking at effectively doing that analysis at the regional level with one of these programs so that we will have that full apples to apples comparison across the board. It won't be ready probably for the first time we run this, because it's going to take some time, but it will help us for future iterations of this to really help us prioritize and identify what those needs are as we move forward. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth, but that's the gist of that. And then lastly, that 4-county state funding program. And just to reiterate here, and this is looking at, you know, those kind of state policy focus areas that state of good repair, fix it first is really important at the state level, and that CAPTI that you heard a lot about that Darwin talked about today, but also folding in safety and increasing modal choice and goods movement and climate adaptation into these projects. So really addressing those kind of statewide policy goals. This will be an intra-county program. So for the 4 counties that are participating in it, Sacramento, Yolo, Yuba, and Sutter, you'll only be competing with agencies in your county. And the funding amounts will be determined roughly by the state amounts that kind of get coordinated, get programmed to each county. So we'll run those as a kind of a 2-year program, and then we'll be working with your agencies as we move those forward. Those of you in your own RTPAs will still handle this, that funding will still be handled through your own RTPAs. And again, kind of similar application format as to the other programs. Very little is changing here because we do like to make that as consistent of a process as possible for coming from one who used to write grant applications to these programs. To make it consistent is a big help as when it comes to staff time that goes into these processes. And these are the priority programs that I was kind of speaking about here. We are planning on keeping 4 of these existing ones moving forward. This is your Engage, Empower, and Implement. This is the engagement-focused equity program that we launched this year and just got applications back last Friday, I believe, from our first round. So we're really excited to see how that comes about. Sustainable mobility is the funding. This was previously the funding program called Mode Shift, and kind of funds a lot of the more innovative components and programmatic components that we do, more traffic demand management and things of that nature. These are smaller programs in the range of around $3 million per program. So these are relatively small programs. CCAT and Spare the Air really focus on working with our air districts and helping fund some of those programs that either build zero emission vehicle replacement funding for their grants, or help on the Spare the Air, on the monitoring and the Spare the Air. It's been a long-standing program for a long time. CCAT goes primarily to fund, it was designed originally for heavy vehicle, more fuel efficient and more cleaner replacement, like trucks and things like that. We've made some adjustments lately to bring it down to more medium-sized vehicles for some vans and for some van pools and some things of that nature.
More flexible.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Freeway Service Patrol, we are kind of bringing this one in-house as part of, for lack of a better term, with the corrective action, change the funding around. This is basically, we'll just be funding this with the federal funding to keep doing what EDCC and NPCTV used to do.
It's a great
in general.
program.
It's a great program,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then the Regional Pavement Management Program is the one I discussed a little bit ago, which really wants to do that full 6-county pavement needs assessment across the region to really help us just level set that data. So because again, not every agency in our region does that level of analysis. And if it's all done at one time, we know it's all consistent and similar.
So to that end, will there be a charge to different counties and jurisdictions for that assessment?
We're talking about taking a portion of the funding of our regional funding element and just
Okay,
taking care of it.
all right.
Kind of want to talk to the calendar, kind of where we're going. Again, this is our last board working group, which has been an exciting 18 months and been fun to work with everybody on these. We are taking those final guidelines as we are assembling them now with really the content that you saw here today. And that'll be coming to the board in October for full board approval and committee approval. We're thinking about running the 4-county STIP program maybe in spring of 2025. We're working on the funding estimate for that to see if that's the right time to do that, but we're still looking through that, but would like to do something in that. We'll be bringing back again that funding estimate for the federal programs, which will include a lot of components. One being that split between the system preservation and performance of the STBG funding and how much will go, that policy decision of how much will go into each of those programs will be a part of that funding estimate. And that will be in September of next year. And then probably doing that federal call, that 6-county call for projects. We're tying it to the adoption of the blueprint, which is going to happen in November 2025. So we have a fresh policy structure to then go forth and implement.
I think this is pretty draft of a calendar, particularly on the federal side, because one of the considerations that we have ahead of us is we have a 6-county call for the first time. So we have a lot more projects that we're looking to fund, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the money like fully equates to those needs. And what we do want to make sure of, and this is again going to be a call that we'll take to the board next year, is do we feel like we have enough money that we can be meaningful with a call for projects at the end of 2025? So over the course of the next few months, we are hoping to get and into, mid 2025, a better understanding of what those dollars are going to look like so we can assess. I think right now it's like $100-something million is what's estimated that we may have available between STBG and CMAQ. When I last looked, I could be wrong. But that doesn't include then those priority programs that he's talking about, which kind of take off the top of those, if you will. We set aside funding for those. So we really need to kind of dive into those numbers and have a really good solid foundation and understanding of what those numbers mean, what that would look like for a 6-county call, and take that to the board for the decision of, do we do this now, or do we need to sort of save up a little bit
Right.
more to
Yeah.
make sure that we can fund now six counties worth of projects in a way that makes sense and helps us meet our goals and all the great stuff that Darwin and Celia talked about. And he mentioned it. Blueprint, we're explicitly calling out a tie to the 2025 blueprint, not the MTP SCS, the 2020, because we want to look forward to, what we should be implementing in the thing we're spending a lot of time in. So that also dictates the timing a little bit. So that November, we're not going to do it anytime sooner than that, but we assume that the blueprint is going to be adopted and everything's going to be good there and we can move along. But there are some things that are going to dictate when we do it. And so there will be more discussions on that end moving forward. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just, I have my own issues on the microphone. So, I mean, just from my experience, and some of you have been around long enough to maybe remember this, we did a 4-county funding round. Which year was this? 2020 or so, 2021, and we had roughly 200 million. And we were able to fund quite a bit of projects across 4 counties. The following one, I want to say, and you guys may remember more than me, was about 130. And that was one in which, I think we really kind of felt a little bit of that. Lots of projects coming in, not a lot awarded, So it just gives you a sense of scale, right? And I would say too, please treat this as draft, right? So, because I think if we go out, and you'll appreciate this, especially on the 6-county call with not much funding, and we say no to most people, right?
Everyone's gonna
It
be mad.
may be mathematically accurate, but it's
All of
not
this
gonna,
works for nothing.
it's not going to, I
Right.
think, follow on
Good point.
this process, right? Which has been so, I think, collaborative, as you've said earlier in the board meeting. So I do just want to emphasize the draft on this, and
We want the
That
first
makes sense.
funding round to be productive and.
right. And we know that there are projects out there. We would love to get this money out the door, right? We would love to start this and kick it off, and because you put all this work into it, but I just would, I think we all would, we just want to make sure we are thoughtful about the timing.
Yeah, and we're already programming out to, which means we're funds are associated with projects out in 27, 28.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in some ways, there's not like a huge, you're not getting it tomorrow, you know what I mean? And so those are things that all play into this. So James is right. We have to really stress that draft aspect of the calendar, and we will for sure know more when we get closer. So that's big. And there's other policy decisions too that I just want to highlight as we get into October of this year in the final guidelines. There's a lot of things that we still need to answer for those guidelines that are pretty big questions. Do we limit the number of applications? Are we going to have dollar limits on some of these programs? How are we going to right size it? Some of that has to do with the amount of money that we have available. And to make sure that we are scaling it appropriately in that way so that we are not raising expectations with hey, submit, and then not fulfilling those in any way, shape, or form when it comes to the awards. So the next month and a half is going to be answering a lot of those questions, and I anticipate October we'll have some pretty good discussion at the board level with what we recommend on those items. I think limiting applications is a very interesting concept. We also have currently asked folks to submit a prioritized list of projects. Perhaps we utilize that in a little bit more productive way where that factors more into how we score. That could also suggest that perhaps providing a lot of applications is not necessarily the way to go if you're going to score some extra points for having submitted what are your clear priorities. So those are big decisions that we just started talking about, I think, last week, as we started to kind of digest what we need to do moving forward. So we don't have the answer for those today. That's what we're figuring out now, but this is where we're at in the process. So what you see in October will be hopefully what gets adopted that we end up doing at some point in the next year, possibly 2 years. But, you know, I think we have some good paths forward that we feel pretty comfortable with on those that I think staff at our agencies will feel comfortable too and will feel are fair and are going to address their needs as well as ours. So
Any comments from the board, from the working group at this point on this calendar, on this process forward? Any insights? I'm seeing a thumbs up, so yeah, good luck with that, and
Yeah. You're gonna approve it and then that's it, you know? Some of you won't be.
I think you're asking the right questions and being thoughtful about that, so thank you. You're hearing support for that.
Do you have additional slides?
I do not, I think, yeah.
That was just, which the board approved, yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah, no, I mean, I can't, you all have said it, but I just also want to express my extreme gratitude and appreciation for the time that you all have put into this, as well as the staff as well. It's been, I know it's a lot, especially for your calendars, 18 months worth of meeting and sitting down for an hour after some exhausting board meetings and finding other times to talk. But I really do believe this has been very helpful for us in our process to make sure that what we're doing is making sense, but also productive conversations to get to solutions instead of feeling, you know, some people feeling left out or like everything is a constant battle. I think this was a really great process. We were dealt an interesting hand with the corrective action, and I just really appreciate all of your time and effort to help us kind of figure out what we should do.
I think it's amazing that I have never, through this entire process, I have not heard one negative comment from any jurisdiction about the process, about concerns for where we're headed. And I think that is remarkable given the hand we were dealt. So that just speaks to your thoughtfulness and the process and everyone's engagement. So just really kudos. It's huge.
I mean, I know we're not going to make everybody happy. You can't do that in life. There's always going to be somebody, and that's okay. But I think if we are hitting the big things and we are finding common ground on the big things, the smaller things that might be a little bit more challenging are going to be easier to tackle. And this is the first step, right? The next time we do the funding round, there could be room to build on some of these things. This is a real test case for doing it a different way than we've done in the past few funding rounds. And so there is going to be trial and error. I don't expect that everything is going to go like exactly perfectly. I mean, maybe it will, but you know, there's going to be lessons learned, and that's part of the process too. So it'll be very interesting to see what we can learn, what we can build on, maybe what we change, but your efforts were a big part in what I hope to be a successful funding round. And
Thank you. Any further director comments on the funding round strategy?
Great job. Yeah, it was pretty extensive.
Right.
Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing how the board receives it and being supportive in that effort.
yeah, we'll be working with all of your staffs as well over the next year plus, depending, to kind of hone in on where they can make sure that they're competitive, really go over some of these details and make it very crystal clear what has just been approved in October and how they can kind of work with these guidelines more clearly.
And I think
so.
the streamlined and consistent applications are also key to this, the success of this.
Yep.
Very, very thoughtful. So any public comments at this point on the strategy or where we're headed?
I feel like I should just reiterate what I said at the board is that, yeah, I think it's at the staff level, I'm sure Woody would say the same thing, that we felt like we were heard. Like, SACOG listened, and we felt like the actual funding guidelines that were developed and you guys have been talking through are reflective of what we've asked for. So we do really appreciate SACOG's, obviously the staff's efforts. And of course, we appreciate the funding round working group at the board level being engaged as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. And you're right, I had an opportunity to speak with Woody this week before this meeting, and he absolutely would reiterate that. So thank you for that. Any final public comments? All right. So you kind of already addressed the next steps. Is there anything else on this?
No,
Well, all
just
right.
thanks.
And Director Guerrero, we got you out of here before 1 o'clock, so that's wonderful. So once again, deep gratitude for everyone involved. And with that, we are adjourned.